I'm just waiting for Adam to join since we're about to go live and do our weekly Sunday brain talk. I think today we're going to talk about psychedelics and the impact that psychedelics have on the brain and what are psychedelics. So just giving Adam a moment here to hop on and see where this conversation goes today. All right, Adam just looks like he's hopped on. Let's see if we can bring him on.
Did it work?
There you go.
I'm getting so used to this. I'm wearing my cool guy headphones here. I hope they
Yeah,
look
seriously.
cool.
Look at those.
This is super. Well, we're talking about psychedelics today, right?
Yeah, I think those headphones go great with psychedelics.
They do. Now, this all stems from an article or like a podcast that I sent you, right? I think it was the Freakonomics podcast.
Yep.
And it was, talking about psychedelics as treatment in a lot of ways, right? That for either PTSD or depression or so let's call it the medical benefits of psychedelics.
Yeah.
Tim Ferriss talks a lot about this, and I've done some psychedelics. I'm not running for, even if I run for president, who cares? Everybody's good with
At
it.
this point, the bar is super low for president.
The bar's,
so.
Right, exactly.
So you're good.
So I've done some psychedelics within my life,
Yeah.
and I've never used them in a medical way, right? I've never used them. They were for social, kind of party drugs, as it were. So I'd be interested to see like what the neurology is, or what experience. I mean, what in the medical community are people really talking about? Where do these conversations go? And then we can get into specific ones and what does what. But just broad strokes, like psychedelics in the brain, like what's going on, Dr. Philippe? What's going on?
For those people who don't know what psychedelics are.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. What is the definition of a psychedelic? Great question.
Yeah. So psychedelics are basically substances, drugs, chemicals that have an impact on the brain in a way that it could potentially cause people to hallucinate at certain dosages. Mm-hmm. Right. So a lot of things sort of fall into those categories. And whenever we're talking about any chemicals that have an impact on the brain, they're all really operating by changing the chemistry of the brain in that moment, by binding to certain receptors, causing the release of certain chemicals in the brain, influencing the brain, the way that the brain actually works. That's how all these chemicals mm-hmm. Impact the brain and impact people's perceptions of their environment.
Yeah.
And I think the big one.
Yeah, what are the biggies? So
I mean, the one that's most popular right now, I think, in neurology and has been since about 2013 is marijuana. Right?
So you would consider marijuana constitutes a psychedelic?
Well, people can hallucinate on marijuana.
But is it in that conversation? I mean, when I think of psychedelics, I guess I don't put marijuana in my mind in that scenario. I go back to like
what,
Timothy Leary and right this stuff in the 70s, and people just going off and doing their own brain studies on creativity with, I think of LSD first and foremost. Like,
well, if you speak to a lot of artists, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they'll tell you that marijuana really can help them with their creativity.
Okay, so let's stick with marijuana. So what's the neurology view on marijuana as a psychedelic, and
the interesting thing is, right, up until the mid 1940s, mm-hmm. marijuana was the number one pain medication out there. You could literally walk into a pharmacy, pick it up the shelves, the same way that you pick up Tylenol or aspirin today. You didn't even need a prescription for it. In 1937, they passed the Marijuana Tax Act to limit its use. And then by the mid-1940s, it was completely off the shelves and it was illegal, right? And so for that reason, because it was federally illegal, really haven't been able to study it in depth over the last, I don't know, 70 plus years. But even when you go back in history, there's a lot of research in terms of marijuana and a lot of these psychoactive, things that it causes people to have, a lot of the psychosis that it can potentially cause, right? And there's a lot of anecdotal data, where people have been using it for all types of things. They've been using it for livestock feed, clothing, certainly medicinal purposes. You can go back, to the Middle Ages and see that it's been used for gout, for rheumatoid arthritis, for epilepsy, just for a lot of different things, for menstrual pain. So yeah, these things have a long history in our culture and in cultures throughout the world. And it's really in the last, less than 100 years that they've, from a legal perspective, the legality of them has changed.
So many questions. I mean, it's like, okay, so putting marijuana to the side for a second,
Yep.
talk to me about well, actually, no. What happens to your brain during psychedelics? Keep marijuana in it. Just overall, like, what goes on? Does it, the best way to put it is this chemical going in, visiting? I keep thinking of now, I was on a call earlier, somebody mentioned this Inside Out, this cartoon movie.
Yeah.
Where they like go. So
I think I mentioned it.
Oh, you mentioned it like a few times ago, and then somebody else just mentioned it. So yeah, exactly. So now I have to watch this movie. I haven't seen it, but I think it's something like somebody comes in with a package of psychedelic and visits the person, the neuron or whatever, and then leaves, and then the neuron goes back to being the neuron. But it sounds like the neuron then is forever changed. Like it's not like the neuron goes back to being how it was. It changes. So psychedelics are changing your brain, or what's like actually happening to your brain when you're
I think
doing
if you're using it for a
psychedelics?
long period of time, it can change your brain. And there are studies that we can, sort of look at, especially when we talk about something like marijuana, where we can see that, look, it does change your brain depending on when in your life you're using it, how often you're using it. And so we can talk about that in a little bit. But in the moment, it's certainly changing the neurochemistry of your brain, right? So it's almost like a key that you put into a lock, and the psychedelic drug being the key. And it causes the release of chemicals like dopamine, which we often talk about, right? So something like ketamine may bind to a receptor called NMDA receptor.
What receptor?
NMDA.
NMDA?
Yeah.
What is NMDA?
It's like N. The N, I think, is just an N. Hold on, I've got this. Hold on, I've got it someplace.
A receptor.
Yeah, I've got to look it up what NMDA stands for again. But this is a receptor where glutamate tends to bind, and glutamate is the chemical that is the major excitatory chemical in the brain. It really sort of revs your brain up.
Google says that you're correct. And no wonder, N-methyl-daspartic acid. No wonder.
They're just hard to pronounce, so you've got to see like the way that they're spelt. But the N stands for N.
Okay, so it is a glutamine receptor.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what happens? What's the reaction?
So look, the NMDA receptor plays a role in a lot of different things: learning, memory, neuroplasticity, which we often talk about, right? So to block that potentially has a significant impact.
So
right?
psychedelics are, so the neurochemistry, you're blocking or allowing
Yeah.
certain, I like your example of keys. So really, on some level, psychedelics, your brain is doing, it's unlocking doors without anything. It's unlocking doors, it's blocking doors, it's locking things, and you're artificially locking and unlocking different doors with these chemical keys that are being brought in from the outside. Some version of that.
Yeah, I mean, your brain is doing what it normally does, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's communicating through a lot of different neurotransmitters, chemicals, communicating through the electrical activity in the brain,
Hmm.
right? And then you introduce a psychedelic, and it either is going to rev that up,
Hmm.
right, in some way, so it causes it to release a lot more chemicals like dopamine, or it's going to start blocking things depending on the drug that you're using.
All right. So what, let me ask you a question. What happens at like neurology conferences? I'm just picturing like you go to a I have like this great image in my head. I
Yeah.
remember Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about like a physicist conference or something, and it was like hilarious. Like, you know, just think like all these physicists or astrophysicists kind of getting in, that's all of the, but like at a neurology conference, say you go in, what is the thing where everybody's like, oh, but guys, we should really go do that psychedelic. Like, let's go try it out. Like,
Yeah, I don't think
you
that
know,
happens at neurology conferences.
maybe. What would it be? What
Look,
would be the
I
psychedelic of choice for
well,
neurologists,
look, I think
and
since
why?
about 2013, the thing that
Mm,
is the most popular that really has taken neurology by storm
yeah,
is medical marijuana, THC, CBD, right?
got it. Sure,
But
sure.
like like you see just in the population at large, there are people that are in favor for it, there are people that are completely against it, and there are people that are
Hmm.
sort of neutral. I think a
Right.
lot of doctors will tell you that even before, so I think medical marijuana is probably legal in about 24 states and then the District of Columbia,
Mm,
so in Washington, D.C., right? But even before that, that was the case. I think a lot of doctors could tell you that, look, we had patients that off the records would tell us that, look, marijuana helped them with whatever symptoms,
hmm.
and you potentially just didn't put it in the records,
Right.
you know? And there's some doctors I'm sure that were like, no, that's you should not do that. And some
Hmm.
doctors, it depends on what your stance was on the science behind it or the lack of science behind it.
Yeah, I guess the real question around psychedelics for me and marijuana and you know, even alcohol earlier we spoke
Yeah,
about is like you know, all this goes back to say no to drugs campaigns, right? And you even told me, look, it would you'd be better for your brain if you didn't drink. Like your
right.
brain would love you if you never had alcohol. So part of me is like, what's the ruling, or what are some of the things around marijuana, psilocybin, you know, LSD? Like, is it the same thing of like, look, your brain would really appreciate none of that being in there, or is there something where it's different than alcohol?
Well, so I think it depends on why you're using it, right? If you're using it
Mm,
from a medical perspective to help you with symptoms, it's a little bit
mm,
different. None of these things are curative. They're not going to cure, you know, MS, epilepsy, stroke, none of that, right?
right,
It's
right.
really helping people to manage their symptoms better. So somebody who's had, let's say somebody who has epilepsy, some people with epilepsy
Yeah.
do really well with something like medical marijuana, but it
Hmm.
doesn't cure the epilepsy. It just means that it decreases the frequency of seizures that they may have,
Yeah.
right? Or it reins it in a little bit.
Continue with that, with like, so epilepsy or somebody that has crippling anxiety or
Yeah.
depression or you know, something like that, where I think we're talking about going is LSD releases creativity, or some, you know, I can be in another state where I'm not always so cramped or anxious. I mean, is that coming for, I mean, I know people seem to think it's coming. I mean, I don't know what the medical community says about it.
Yeah, look, the reality is something like medical marijuana is legalized throughout multiple states, right? In about half the states. It's not federally legal,
Hmm.
which causes a lot of different issues when it's not well regulated.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying that just because it becomes federal legal means that the regulations get better,
Right,
right?
right.
But at the very least, you'd like to think that if something's regulated by the federal government, then it's not being laced with other things, right? So it all depends, you know.
What, yeah, what is it like ketamine? Ketamine's legal, right?
So
Ketamine's
ketamine,
illegal.
yeah. So the FDA fairly recently approved ketamine.
So
Right?
I always remember ketamine as like horse tranquilizer or some version or special K, right? I mean,
Well,
is
so
that right?
special
Is that
K
right?
can, I think
Different?
special K can refer to synthetic medical marijuana or synthetic marijuana.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay.
But I've got to double check that. There's a synthetic version of marijuana. But ketamine is an anesthetic that
Yeah.
people use, that surgeons tend to use, but it also benefits people who have depression. So it was
So
recently approved for the treatment of depression.
I think so that what I'm getting is that it really does depend on what you're using it for. Like if it's reducing your seizure, your frequency of
Yeah.
seizures or something like that, then it's probably okay. And if
But
there's not,
you still have to be really careful, right? I
I can
mean,
imagine with the dosages. So isn't there a case then to be made for like completely regulating it so that
yeah.
people are getting safer doses in a
Yeah,
ways?
absolutely. And I think the bigger case is that you make it federally legal so that way
Mm.
it can be studied
Yeah, that's
in
true.
depth, right? Because when it's not federally legal, it becomes much tougher to study that particular chemical,
Hmm.
right? And so then you don't know about all the potential adverse effects, the dosages. So even in different states, so let's say something like marijuana is legal in New Jersey, right? New Jersey, a couple of years ago, had about 3 dispensaries that would you can get marijuana from. You can get medical marijuana from. Those 3 dispensaries could create completely different strains, right? And often would create completely different strains. And so if you went to one dispensary this month and the following dispensary the next month, you couldn't guarantee that you were getting the same strain. And in fact, if you went to a dispensary this month and the same dispensary next month, you still couldn't guarantee that you were getting the same strain, right?
Mm.
And so that can create a potential significant issue. And
Hmm.
New Jersey, which is literally right next door to New York, while New Jersey only had 3 dispensaries, New York had like 20 plus private companies
Hmm.
that were, creating their versions of their strains of medical marijuana.
All right. So shifting a little bit outside of the marijuana because feel like I feel like people have done some marijuana. Not everybody's done LSD. And I know we'll save the God particle and the God part of the brain for another, but like there is something about like when you hear reports of LSD or that there's this like God experience or like so there's this like spiritual, right,
Yeah,
experience. What is that in the brain? Like we can have God 101 or what we think God means and in the brain, but
sure.
like what as far as psychedelics go, like what is it doing? What is that doing to my brain?
Yeah, so something like ketamine is not your typical like general anesthetic, right? So
Right.
when surgeons use anesthetics to put you to sleep, they're actually putting your brain to sleep, right?
Mm,
And you can see like if you're looking at the electrical activity of somebody's brain, it goes completely flat. The brain is just knocked out.
hmm.
Something like ketamine, it's not like that. Like the person's not there, but they're not asleep in the same way. So it's considered like a dissociative anesthetic. It means it's kind of like you're kind of just somewhere else, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, I'm not sure we really know exactly what's going on with the brain, except that we know that it's impacting those that NMDA receptor, and so glutamate is not being absorbed by the neurons in the same way.
Okay, so I wake up on a Monday, I'm like, okay, I'm having a good week. Great. Then I do some psychedelic and something is different. I'm not in this life.
Yeah,
I'm tripping, right? I'm tripping out. I'm on some other
yeah.
plane. So where is that in my brain? Like what is my brain actually doing? Maybe it's tough to study, but where is that other place? Like, because it's still here. It's not like I'm not riding an actual rainbow, on a unicorn. I mean,
Right,
I'm definitely still in my brain, but
right.
if my low level basics for me are function, do this, that, just kind of like chopping through my day, this I feel much more creative or
Hmm.
maybe there's paranoia in those things too, but let's take it on the good side. I'm feeling more creative, more alive, more connected. Let me ask you that. What is the connected part of the brain? Like when I feel really connected, to something, to life? Like, what's going on there?
Well, think about how you interpret your life, right? You interpret your life based on your senses. It's your ability to see, smell, touch, hear, taste,
Hmm.
right? All of that, what you see, right, has to be interpreted by the neurons in your brain. I mean,
Hmm.
it's part of the reason why two people can look at the same thing, right, and have the same experience and come out with two completely different versions, because there's an interpretation that goes on because of the neurons in the brain. And certain drugs like ketamine interfere with that process, right? They completely alter how you perceive your life.
Hmm.
And so it changes your experience in that moment.
So this is on some level without psychedelics, like natural psychedelic is experience change, is different points of view, is changing it up, some version of that. Like
Yeah, I mean,
if you're really just looking for a different experience of Adam or Philippe.
it's changing just how your neurons are functioning in the moment.
Hmm.
Like they cannot process the information in the same way.
Okay, okay, okay. I'm looking up LSD on my Google right now. Google's gonna think they're like, this guy's having a great weekend. Lysergic acid, potent hallucinogenic drug. So what does hallucination means what's happening during a hallucination?
You're interpreting visual stimulation that's not there or auditory stimulation that's not really there, right? So you're
And where
seeing
does
things that aren't there.
where's the visual and auditory parts of my brain?
Visual is your occipital lobe.
Which is
Um,
here above my stem.
yep. So right back here. Okay.
Yeah,
And then, yeah, your auditory tends to be more in your temporal areas. So kind of right above your ears.
right near my ears.
Yeah.
I always wonder when I get off these calls, my brain is hurting. I'm like, it's like getting a
Well,
workout.
your brain has no pain receptors.
So what's that about? What does that mean?
So your brain
It
is
doesn't have.
never actually hurting. But the meninges, the coverings that are outside the brain that sort of layer the brain, those have pain receptors. Blood vessels have pain receptors.
Uh,
But your brain itself have no pain receptors. That's why we can do brain surgery on people,
yeah.
where we wake them up. You can have them playing a guitar while you're operating on their brain. You can have them speaking to you while you're operating on their brain. There's no pain receptors there.
Have you seen? You've seen one of these happen, obviously.
Yeah, no, we've done it a few times.
Did you? That's crazy. So somebody's skull is open,
Yep,
and you're talking to them, and a neurosurgeon, is doing some stuff.
right.
What's the plan? Like, it's so
And
funny.
then,
Keep going, please.
so imagine their skull is off,
Hmm.
surgeon is doing surgery. You are, you've got all these things connected to the person, that's checking everything from vital signs to brain function. And you see that the person's starting to have a seizure while they're having surgery
Oh
and
my
their skull
God.
is off. You know
Yeah.
how we shut that seizure down?
I don't. I have no clue.
It's an ice bath. You take ice water and you throw it on their brain.
Oh. Wow. It's funny. Like as you're saying this, I keep thinking of myself trying to like plan a week. I'm like plan something, and I'm like I could complain and say, "Oh, this was difficult to plan," or I couldn't get everybody to on board. Like the amount of detail and planning that must go into removing someone's skull and getting them to play a guitar while doing neurosurgery. I mean, your kids must be like I mean, come on, they got to be super organized. You have to be like one of the most organized people ever, right? With all
Uh,
of your stuff. It's got to be that whole process. We're getting off of psychedelics, but that's
well,
like fascinating.
it's a team approach, right? You've got the surgeons doing the
Yeah.
surgery. Everybody's got their part. So the surgeons are doing the surgery. I may be in there. It depends, right? I may be in there helping them figure out what part of the brain that needs to come out if the person has epilepsy, and that's why you're the person's having surgery. It's really an epilepsy surgery, or you
Hmm.
may be in there just monitoring certain functions of the brain while they're performing their surgery. So everybody has their different roles to play.
Unreal. All right, let's go back to psychedelics.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think. So it's LSD, mushrooms, right? AKA psilocybin.
yeah.
Ketamine is up there.
Ketamine's up there.
What are some of the other biggest hits for
I
psychedelics?
guess probably Molly's, right?
Yeah, MDMA, right?
Yeah,
So yeah, okay, that's a good one. So that you often hear of as the love drug, right?
yeah.
Right. So what is happening? This is a good one. So psychedelics in the brain and love. Like what's happening there? Like
So
what is
so
it? Yeah.
Molly's are considered to like they're one of these drugs that allows you to feel more empathic, allows you to connect
Yes.
more with people.
Correct. Correct.
And so I've got to look and see, but there's a good chance that it's because it's increasing things like not just dopamine, but increasing things like oxytocin, which is a chemical that really bonds people. But
Hmm.
all of these are influencing different chemicals in the brain by binding to receptors. So they're
Yeah.
fitting into these locks. They're acting like keys fitting into these locks and
I
causing your
really love
brains
that. I really love the
to
keys and the
release
locks.
chemicals or to shut other chemicals down.
I really like that image of keys and locks, especially as a crypto guy. I love the my keys, my cryptos, my oxytocin, my empathy.
Yeah.
So how do we get how do we generate oxytocin? How do we not artificially? So I don't want to be taking a Molly every day to be like in life. It's just not
Yeah.
the best use of my time. So what are ways of increasing oxytocin naturally? Are there foods that do it? I'm sure you're going to say exercise. So,
Well, I was going to say, things like physical affection,
mm,
you know,
but,
sex is
yeah,
another one that causes
yeah,
release of oxytocin.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, you get oxytocin when women are giving birth, right?
Hmm.
When they're breastfeeding. And oxytocin is one of those chemicals. So we think about it in terms of, right, like giving birth and, it helps sort of the milk begin to let down when a woman breastfeeds. But oxytocin
Hmm.
causes a mind-body connection. And so let's say if a woman who is breastfeeding hears her baby crying in another room,
Hmm.
that all of a sudden she'll start to lactate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Without the baby latching on, right? So it causes these physiological changes in the body.
Yeah, this is, I'm literally Googling, like, is there an oxytocin drink? Like, I,
I
I'm
don't know.
just,
Let me know what you find.
no, because like, so say physical affection,
Yeah,
sex, birthing. So this is all stuff to do to get
right.
oxytocin. Yet I can go to a Starbucks and get caffeine implanted into,
Yeah.
I'm caffeining myself all day. Like, is there like who does the Starbucks of oxytocin? Can you do that? Like, can I just go wake up and have a shot of oxytocin in the
I
morning?
mean, why would you want a shot of oxytocin though?
What if I wanted to feel more connected and more empathic during a day? Or what if I'm with my
I
partner
mean, but
and,
you can potentially see how manipulative that would be, right?
but if I'm taking it for myself, I'm not giving it to somebody else. I want to experience it myself,
Yeah,
I agree with you. There's
yeah.
definite
Listen,
like ethical ramifications for it.
yeah. I mean, look, there are companies that put out oxytocin sprays and
Do
oxytocin,
they? I got to get up
you
on
know,
this.
but whether or not they really work, I'm not sure. I'm sure it gets put out almost like a love potion.
Yeah, yeah. Now it says, of course, the article I pull up is the dark side of oxytocin, so I could see not always that clear. Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, some psychologists are keen to prescribe oxytocin off-label, mild or so-called social unease. So
yeah.
yeah, something like that. I could see that. Okay. Um, yeah. I mean, that's all I got to psychedelics. I do want to talk about the God stuff at a different time because I think that's a whole separate, and that's part of your course. I mean, not your course, but that's part of your, right? I mean, God in the brain has really been studied, I would imagine,
I
right?
mean, listen,
What
one
that
of the
feels like.
reasons that I am so passionate about neurology and the brain is because I think it is the part of us that most connects us to God, right? Because it is the part of us that can create both our internal and external environment. You know, like when I talk about neuroplasticity, I'm talking about creating new neurons, new connections, right? As well as destruction, destroying neurons and destroying those connections, and
Hmm.
how that manifests in your life.
Yeah. I do want to make sure that we have a good one. The dark side of the brain. Um, not now. I have to think about what that would be, but it's easy to say it connects me with God and I feel good.
Yeah.
And then it's like, what is the dark side of the brain? Like, what does that look like? Are there like little things in my brain like, oh yeah, motherfucker, I'm
Well,
waiting
I
for
think the
you
dark
to.
side of the brain, and it looks like, when you see people being manipulated in different ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, the dark side of the brain could be anything from the way that you see a lot of companies do their marketing. It could be the fact that,
We're gonna come back to this. I love that.
right? I mean, it could be the fact that, look, regardless of what your politics are, it probably wasn't a good idea yesterday for the president of the United States to have a couple thousand people on the lawn of the White House, right, during a pandemic. How
Mm-hmm.
does that
Mm-hmm.
happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Clearly, you're sort of manipulating enough people, getting them to think about things in a certain way that they're willing to take that risk.
Have you seen, you know who Darren Brown is?
No.
He's like a British mentalist, and he has this great show called The Push on Netflix, that is all about social, what is it? Someone who's very susceptible to influence.
Yeah.
And they kind of go through people and they do interviews and they get a bunch of people that are like super susceptible to influence, and they basically put them on a TV show where everything around them is like the Truman Show, in order to see if by the end of the show they'll kill someone. Like crazy,
Yeah.
fascinating stuff, and it's called Darren Brown, The Push. It's on Netflix. But I want to come back. We'll go our two future episodes. One is on the God side of it,
Yeah.
right? And I think we can kind of agree that God is, when I'm thinking angelically. I mean, we
Sure.
can talk about old versions of God is maybe not that nice or whatever, but let's just assume God is like um more uplifting. And then the darker side of this with like susceptibility and marketing and
Sure.
manipulation. That's good, actually. Put that in. We should put that in the show.
Yeah.
Because God can be dark. It's all really the same thing. It's all in our brain.
Listen, it's funny, back when it was safe to fly and I was flying all the time,
Mm-hmm.
there was one day, the plane is coming in for a landing and we're hovering literally right on top of the cloud, right? So you look
Mm-hmm.
down, you're in the clouds, and you look straight out, you're right above the cloud line. And I remember thinking to myself, this is so funny because as a kid, this is where I thought God lived, right on top of
Yeah.
the clouds, right?
Yeah.
And now as an adult, um, for me, God lives in here,
I love that. I love
right?
that.
And so, yeah, it's interesting just how you evolve in terms of your thinking about God from when you're a child to an adult.
Yeah. Okay. Things I want to cover in future episodes. God, dark, light and dark.
Yeah.
I want to talk about like brain overwhelm, because I think one of the things that you just mentioned that is kind of comforting is, as a kid, it's quite nice to think that God is in the clouds.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you matrix that and you're like, take the red pill and you wake up and you're like, God is in your brain, that is a whole other level of responsibility. Your brain's like, what? It's not in the clouds? I liked it better when it was just in the clouds. Like
Yeah.
this waking up, which comes with overwhelm. And like the reason that we're so stressed out is like, I mean, I think it's something, and I do want to talk about the brain and death in the future. That's one of my fascinating topics that I love, which is self knowledge, right? Like, I don't think an aardvark is like going around going, well, the average age of an aardvark is 7 years. I got a few years here, so I'm going to make the most of my aardvark life. I really wanted to retire at age 5. and spend the last 2 years of my aardvark life just aardvarking the heck out of my life. They're just not. They don't know what alive and dead. I could be totally wrong about
Well,
that.
no, I think they probably know what alive and dead is. I think, but you know, other animals,
Yeah.
as long as there's no human interference, they're allowed to be what that animal is.
But do you think an aardvark in their brain, the aardvark brain knows at the same level like what alive and dead means, and like
I think they respond to threat
their
in the
own.
same ways, so they must know it,
I want to get into this. I always thought
right?
that it was the reason we can comprehend our own death, like that. That's interesting. What is it? I want to go. We'll get into that future episode. I want to know what the studies say.
You've got to remember though, the studies are biased because they're by people.
And they also haven't interviewed any aardvarks.
That's right.
During
You can't,
this.
right? But what you do know is that every animal responds to threat. So
Yeah,
that
so
they know that
nobody
their
wants to
lives could
die.
be, what?
Right. Exactly. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. So they know that their lives, that, you know, harm can come to them, right? I mean, you see other animals, if their animal friends and families have perished, that they show signs of sadness, right? Where they don't want to leave the body of their.
I have seen that. Right.
So they must comprehend life and death, right?
Yeah, this is.
I think human beings are probably one of the few animals where we're not allowed to just naturally be us, right? We have to get these jobs. We've got to partake in the
what's
rat
up
race.
with work? Bullshit.
Right? Whereas, like, you know, if as long as an elephant doesn't interact with a human being, the elephant's allowed to be an elephant.
Yeah.
Interacts with a human being, then they become a tourist attraction. They become you know, they're in circuses, they're in zoos. They're not allowed to be what they are meant to be.
The real TV show is humans. Do we suck? Like,
Yeah. The
how
answer would
hard?
be yeah.
How hard do we suck? And how do we stop sucking?
Listen, I think the answer would be that yeah, we're probably one of the worst things, if not the worst thing that's happened to this planet.
I go back and forth on this one, right? Like, I go back and forth on this one.
Listen, we can't even live with ourselves. Do you think? Like we
individually.
Yeah, we definitely can't live with like other animals, right? I mean, you know, I always find it really interesting. Humans kill millions and millions of sharks per year. Yet, if a shark kills a human being because that person was swimming in the ocean,
right? Of course.
Then we go out and like kill 10 sharks in the area.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
It's absolutely absurd.
Okay, this is another episode. I'm writing this down. I like that psychedelics has really, this whole psychedelic conversation has expanded my mind.
It does. It expands your awareness. Psychedelics expand your awareness.
Even talking about it.
Yeah, it takes off the limits of what your life could be or what your life is, right?
Because one of the other things I wanted to talk about in the future was brains now, brains back in the, like, when did our brains change? Like our brain of Adam, Neanderthal Adam, different than human Adam, different than caveman Adam. Like, I know the popular narrative is kind of like, well, that's why we're doing this, because we're still in our reptilian brain. And I can kind of know what I'm talking about there. Yeah. But like, how really different were they back when we were on the scene and we're getting eaten by lions and it was a threat? Yeah. Whereas now our brains are here and we're like killing 10 to 1 sharks because like somebody got bitten while surfing.
Well, our brains are bigger and more complicated. By more complicated meaning that, yeah, we've got a lot more neurons now than we did then. And the process in terms of our brain's evolution over the last 2.5 million years is called encephalization.
Right? Like encephalitis. What is that exactly?
Encephalization?
Yeah, it feels like it's a swelling.
So encephalization, just means that the brain got bigger and more complicated. And so that process has been going on for the last 2.5 million years. And you can see that there are parts of the brain that have gotten a lot bigger, right? So the frontal lobe is one of those parts that got a lot bigger, your entire cortex, which allows for planning and decision-making. Your hippocampus plays a role in short-term memory, got a lot more neurons in it, right? And then also your cerebellum, which allows for the coordination of movements. A lot more neurons increase there.
What didn't get bigger that Dr. Duyan says should get bigger from here on out, right? Say like, dude, we are way over developed here in the planning side of it. We need to, like, what should grow? Like, what's your hope over the next 2.5 million years? Like, our brain grows how?
Well, I think it's in terms of becoming kinder, more empathic,
Agree,
you know,
agree.
more peaceful,
Hmm.
right? So whatever parts of our brain are sort of involved in that,
So
you
don't
know.
ask me that. I'm like,
Yeah, I mean,
what parts? Yeah,
I think it's as our brains get bigger, they become a lot more complicated, right? We always talk about things being sort of interconnected, and all these
yeah,
areas
yeah,
play on each other.
but where's the kind part of our brain?
There's not one place that's the kind part, right? It's the interaction of all of these things. You know, you've
No,
got to be
no,
able
I want
to,
my God is in the clouds moment. I want you to
right?
tell me
But
the
it doesn't
kind
work
part
that
of,
way. You've got to be
how
able
dare
to
you?
sympathize with other people, right? You've got to be able to
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
put yourself in their shoes. One of the
yeah,
things
yeah.
that you see with people who have autism, they often say that they have a hard time uh, putting themselves in somebody else's shoes, right? And it's not because they have less neurons or that you see any structural difference in their brains. It's that their brains the neurons have evolved differently. Their brains are wired a little bit differently.
Well, I'm happy you brought this up. I remember volunteering for the Special Olympics when I was in high school, and I was always like, my heart would like erupt when you'd see like a child with Down syndrome, for instance, and they were like pure love. And
Yeah.
I was like, what is going on in their brain that they are just pure love? Maybe they're upset that they couldn't communicate something that they wanted to, but I think overall, you'll say it's the Special Olympics, but that really is very special that there is pure love there. So
Yeah.
what is that? What's going on there?
Yeah. It's
Brain
the
wise.
neurons, their connections are just different than that of people who don't have something like autism or
Yeah,
something like Down syndrome.
fascinating. Well, for another episode, I have all my episodes now. We'll write down.
Yeah.
This is good stuff.
You've got like the God complex. You've got a whole bunch in there.
Too much. Even talking about psychedelics gets me more creative. I'm now going to have my brain watch football. I think that's on the agenda.
That's right. The
Yeah.
Jets are probably going to go 0-5, but you don't
Oh
care.
my
You're in
God.
Florida.
Yeah, but look, the Bucks lost. The Jets are terrible. I'm a Giants fan, and
They're
they're going to lose
terrible.
to the
They're 0-5,
Cowboys.
right?
They're going to lose to the Cowboys. They're 0 nation. The hope is tank for Trevor. Although for the Giants, they would have to then get rid of Daniel Jones, right? Or trade the pick. My hope is that they get up there, trade the picks, get out
Listen,
of there.
Daniel Jones had one really great game last year. It happened to be his like first game,
And
and
that
then
was
it's
it.
just been downhill ever since.
I agree. And I'm a Duke man, so I'm rooting for him, but he's not.
Yeah.
He has no, well, look, he's got Saquon's hurt. He's got no receivers, a couple of them, but it's a tough situation. Boo hoo, I'm getting paid a lot of money.
I mean, they're getting paid a lot to catch a ball. Like
I was
to
going to
say they have
say,
no
exactly.
receivers, it's like, dude, just catch the damn ball.
Exactly. Exactly. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. Thank
Yeah.
you. I'm not doing any psychedelics this week, but I'll let you know when that happens. I want to read more about it. And again, Philippe, Dr. Dion, thank you. Inlay Brain Fit Institute. Follow him on Insta, Facebook, all the good places, right?
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
So good, man. So good. Thanks for always doing this. Let's keep it going.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay.
Enjoy your football.
Thank you. You too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.